Oh my god, there's a spider. Hang on a second, Brad.
Whoa! It's a tac.
Tac.
It's the spiders from Ocarina.
He is crawling on my... He has noticed me.
Oh.
Oh no, he's panicking. He's running. We just got eaten by likes. While we're in here, let's recover and have a chat. With me today, I have the Triforce of Courage wielder, Brad.
Oh, thank you, and I'm so glad we used that opening.
And I am Hunter, and I am also here. Kind of a, just really quick, this is going to have some mild spoilers for the beginning of the game. I think that we're both kind of early on in the game. Neither of us have done too much story. It's probably a little bit more mechanical than anything, talking about the world, talking about the mechanics of the game.
Yeah, the overall feel and the experience so far before getting into the story.
The gameplay aspects of it. And to be fair, we're both really early in the game anyways. I think I've played a little bit more than you, but then you're like, I think you said that you were also like 20, 15 hours or something like that.
Yeah, I think I'm around the 15 to 20-ish hours of gameplay overall. If not, maybe more. I don't know. I haven't checked. I'm just guessing here.
And for a game like this, that really is just a drop in the bucket.
Yeah, so this is still early. This is early gameplay going on here.
Yeah, exactly. So just want to put that out there. Maybe some mild spoilers. I know that some people are sensitive to stuff like gameplay type things, but we aren't going to be talking about any of the story.
Yeah.
So without further ado, what did you think about the Great Sky Island?
Okay, so I actually really appreciate just the name itself, because Great Plateau, Great Sky Island. I hope they continue that. I'm trying to think of the other areas in other Zelda games and what they were called, and I don't know. I hope they continue with the naming. But generally speaking, in the same way that I felt that feeling in the first Breath of the Wild, where you come out of the cave and you just see this sprawling world, and kind of gives you that feeling of like, oh, this is so cool. I want to go explore. I think somehow they were able to do that again.
Yeah.
I think it was good of Nintendo to do it in the sky, so you could see like an even a larger overarching world. You could see the Hyrule below, but you see all these islands going about it, and they do it in such a way that the whole opening leading up to that, it was fantastic. I don't know if we want to talk too much about the very early story. It is a story beat, but it's like the first thing that happens in the game, leading up into the Great Sky Island. I don't know. I'm glad they were able to capture that lightning in the bottle again, at least with the initial reaction of seeing the Great Sky Island. I'm not even talking about what you experience on it yet.
And it's kind of impressive how they managed to capture that feeling, that like magic in a bottle, like just like Breath of the Wild did, except unlike Breath of the Wild, we're already familiar with this world. And still, to be fair, the Great Sky Island is its own separate area. It's a brand new area. But you can still see the rest of Hyrule below you. But so much has changed in Hyrule, and even though you can see the broad strokes, you can see like the rough topology, like, oh, there's Death Mountain over there, there's the Zora's Domain over there. Like, when you look at Death Mountain, you see that it has fundamentally changed. You see this, so you see this malice coming out, these like tendrils coming out of Death Mountain. You look over to Zora's Domain and you see this sticky tar-like substance spewing out of the land. You see all of these changes to Hyrule. And so just like how in Breath of the Wild, it has that like big opening shot as soon as you walk out of the Shrine of Resurrection. And that kind of gets you in the mood of exploring, wanting to explore everything. I feel like just wandering around the Great Sky Island and seeing the changes that have been made to Hyrule, I got a similar sensation. I was like, this is a world that I'm supposed to be very familiar with, and yet I can't help but be fascinated by all these changes, and I need to go explore it, It's how did they manage to do that for a world we've already explored is really magical.
And I think, so in a way, the Great Plateau was kind of like that trading ground to get you acclimated to the new systems of the game.
It's a tutorial.
The Great Sky Island, the Great Sky Island does the same thing. But with the new set of tools that you have. So you don't have the same abilities as you did in Breath of the Wild. So you have basically a new playground to explore those abilities in the Sky Island. And I actually think it's a lot more contained in a way a little bit better than Great Plateau, because the Great Plateau
Probably.
you were still on the ground,
Hmm.
and like theoretically I could see Link trying to get down right for the beginning, but in the Great Sky Island you as the character are very much confronted with just you're in the island, you got to go figure it out to get down to get down below.
Yeah, you feel
And
trapped.
yeah, there is this level of like, hey, I'm trapped, or like I have to go to this like area to area, kind of a little bit more linear, which people might not like initially because they're like, oh, we don't like linear stuff. But I actually think linear gameplay can be really good, and I think it's a little bit easier to deal with here on the Great Sky Island, where they kind of show you, oh, it's like, okay, go here, all right, you got this, now go do this, you got this, and now open up the world.
And even then, so like there's clearly the first shrine replacement that it kind of wants you to go to, but you can go to any of them. So actually, my first shrine, because I think there was something else on another part of the map that I wanted to explore first that I knew was already like behind me. And so I actually didn't go to the shrine that it wanted me to go to first. I actually went around the opposite side of the map and then started there.
Mm.
By complete just I totally meant to go there, and I thought that that was probably like the only real one. But then as I walked around, I realized, oh, here's another one. So I just did that one really quick.
Hmm.
So it's still fairly open. There's a sense of implied linearity, and this game, without going too much into the story structure, it is very open, just like Breath of the Wild. But there is a little bit more of a linearity. Like I've been to Hyrule Castle, and I've been to like a lot of the areas where I thought that the like end of the game, like the story would conclude, and I haven't come across anything like that yet. So it
Hmm.
there is a kind of there is a kind of sense that you need to do things block by block, like chunk by chunk, despite there being several different stories, several different options presented to you in the very beginning.
Yeah.
And that goes the same way in the Great Sky Island, where there isn't the implied, like you do have to do things in certain chunks. You have to like go to this area, then this area, then this area, and do like the story of the Great Sky Island
Yeah.
in an order. But largely, when the game started opening up in that at that part of the game, like I went to a completely different shrine than it wanted me to, and I was starting to do things out of order, and it still kind of worked out.
And when we're talking like implied linearity, we can even look at like the map layout itself. So unlike the Great Plateau, which is just not necessarily flat land, but any looking cranny you can go to,
Hmm.
because it's in the sky, and kind of the layers to the land are all separated. You can kind of guide a player through different ways of through different areas, while they have the freedom to approach those areas however they like. And I personally like that approach a lot more,
Hmm.
because there is definitely times in Breath of the Wild where you can cheese very easily different parts of the game
Hmm.
and get to areas in ways that either intended or not intended, like whatsoever, which is fine until it kind of like breaks certain ways of going about it. Specifically as well, when they don't give you don't have the paraglider right at the beginning, so that
Yeah,
also kind of helps with the linearity. You can't just fly over and bridge the gaps initially.
yeah, you have to learn the mechanics from scratch again.
Hmm. I'm thinking specifically that there's one part in the Sky Island where there's just a very large lake, and it forces you as the player
Right.
to use the mechanics of the game to traverse it. And so no matter which way you choose to go about it, you are confronted with like this lake.
Hmm. I still feel like there were certain parts of even in the Great Sky Island that I did the way that the game did not intend me to. Like I solved the
Hmm.
problem in a way that the game did not intend me to, which is very Breath of the Wild. But I could still tell, like, oh, I'm supposed to do this next. And
Hmm.
for the most part, like that part with the lake, it does kind of force you to do things a specific way. But then like I was watching my girlfriend play, and I noticed she did something completely different to get past that lake. So there
Hmm.
are still some janky shenanigans you can do, but it's probably a little bit more rigid than it was in Breath of the Wild.
I think it's more controlled. Like I think the developers took the previous game, highlighted what worked, which is the creativity of going through an obstacles that they present without without making it so that those obstacles can be just bypassed. Like there will be an obstacle, but you have the creativity to go about it your way.
Hmm.
Where I do remember there was plenty of things in Breath of the Wild where you could basically just run right past the obstacle and just not deal with it whatsoever in some way,
Hmm.
shape, or form. At least in terms of the opening area.
Yeah, and just as far as the Great Sky Island is concerned in general, just hearing from like everything that you're talking about and kind of my memories from it, it kind of feels like more so than the Great Plateau, the Great Sky Island part, like that story that you're progressing through, almost feels like it could be a game in and of itself and not even a small one
Mm-hmm.
because of how much they put in that tutorial compared to Breath of the Wild.
Yeah.
There's almost more story in that area than just all of Breath of the Wild, to be completely honest.
Well, I don't know if that says necessarily high praise of Tears of the Kingdom or if it's just a really bad take or not take, but really bad on Breath of the Wild. The
A
the
little
story
bit of column A, a
was
little bit of column B.
yeah. So I can appreciate immensely what they're trying to do with Tears of the Kingdom without getting into the story, but that they are giving some thought and are highlighting the story as being something worth telling
Hmm.
versus Breath of the Wild, which was more like you can have it if you want, but it's not necessary.
Hmm.
So another aspect of the Great Sky Island that they introduced are and we had predictions in I think one of the first videos of those chameleon guys.
Hmm.
And I think in that video, I thought it looked bigger on the trailer. I'll admit, at least to me, it looked bigger. I thought it was going to be like a boss or like a mini boss. As it turns out, that's not the case. There's these little dudes that steward the land and are just on the Great Sky Island as little tutorial
You're
helpers.
talking about the constructs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the constructs. So I was very wrong on that one. So they're all around the Sky Island helping you out. They just want to talk to you.
And without going too much into the story about what those guys are, those like little robots are, there's kind of a bunch of them, and they're kind of these ancient machines still doing their jobs from way, way back in the distant past. And they're basically living small little lives just amongst themselves. Like there are soldier constructs that are defending the land. There are steward constructs kind of tending to the land, ranger constructs, there's hunter constructs, there's builder constructs. There's all of these different types of constructs that are just kind of living their little lives up there that aren't
Hmm.
necessarily like enemies. I think that in the way that a lot that we kind of assumed they were. And some of them are like the soldier constructs will attack you because you're a stranger to them and they're designed to be protecting from strangers.
Yeah,
So like okay, fair enough. They're enemies, but they're not bad guys
yeah.
in the same way that Ganon's forces are.
They're more like obstacles on the land, and I love that it feels like all of them kind of use like that fuse ability. So the fusion
Mhm.
one. So in one of the abilities is you get to fuse whatever object you want, either to your shield or to your weapon. And they
Mhm.
do a very good job of showcasing some of that with those enemies on the Great Plateau.
Yeah, it gives you
Because
some ideas.
it gives you some ideas, and also like when you combine certain even stuff that they drop. So like their horns or like ball or something, I don't know. Something out of the enemy, you can actually just straight up make a new kind of weapon in a way. So if you have a stick, not a twig, but like a stick, and you just fuse the horn on it, you can make like this razor blade thing. And
Yeah.
it has its own unique name. And it's a little bit more complex than just putting a rock on top of your sword and it just looks a little silly. No, it just actually makes a new weapon. And it's fun
Mhm.
to see what kind of new weapons you can make out of that.
And I remember early on, just when my mind got blown by the openness of the fusibility, because one of the, I think it was a ranger construct, was chopping down a tree, or a steward construct, one of them was chopping down a tree, and he said to go pick up an axe. And then that's when I realized that axes are just sticks, they're just clubs but with one of those little flat rocks on them.
Mm-hmm.
That's what makes it an axe. Like, oh, just fuse them together, just make my own axe. Like, that opens the potential up so much. Which, to be fair, that's what an axe is.
Yeah. In its most base form, you have discovered caveman axe.
Exactly, yeah. So, which is kind of appropriate for the kind of more ancient feel of that area, you know?
Yeah. I found a tool, or not a tool. I think it was a claymore or something, and all it had was a green mushroom on top, a
Mm-hmm.
stamina mushroom. But for some reason, it gave it a bouncy ability by doing that.
Because the mushrooms
And
are, like,
yeah,
bouncy-ish.
and like
Yeah.
if you throw it, it bounces a lot, but it also makes it so that you can like continually swing the charge attack, and it does like half the stamina because you have a stamina
Oh,
mushroom on your sword, so the charge attacks take up a lot less stamina. And I'm sitting there just spinning around, and I only have one full bar of stamina, and it's like this is going on for a very long time. I'm doing a lot of damage, even though this sword isn't exactly all that powerful.
yeah, just the openness of how kind of the effects, yeah, and you can read the effects on the weapons after you fuse them together. In blue or something, right underneath it, it'll say this grants this effect, even though it's not like an effect in the same way that Breath of the Wild had effects, which is still present in Tears of the Kingdom, like attack up
Yeah,
or
you can find weapons that have native upgrades already on them,
yeah,
but I
but then
think
there's
it's
another
so
fuse ability on top
nice.
of that.
Yeah, and I think it's so nice that I actually can dictate and create those like special weapons on my own instead of
hmm
really just hoping that an enemy drops a special weapon that I would like to have in an encounter that I'm trying to
Well,
do in Breath of the Wild.
so you can still find stuff with like attack plus 12 or something. You can still find like quick shoot bows and stuff like
Yeah.
that. But then it's more along the lines of how all bows are basically the same in Breath of the Wild, except for like the golden bow where you can like zoom in.
Yeah.
That is a unique property of that bow. But so many weapons in Tears of the Kingdom have unique properties like that. You can still get attack up on top of your fused item attack also. So you have like plus 14, but then adding a mushroom onto it adds like a plus 1 or plus 2 or something. But it's just because it's a stamina mushroom, you also get an additional unique effect. It's that kind of
Yeah.
thing. Like you can really customize your weapons very, very interestingly.
There was a moment where there was one of the dragons that show up kind of like from Breath of the Wild where you shoot off like a piece of it,
Mm-hmm.
where it was way too high for me. So I couldn't get to it. It was really high in the air until I remembered I have a rocket and I can put that rocket on my arrow
mm-hmm.
and fire it so straight and true that it can reach like a mile in the air.
Yeah.
And I was able to get something from doing something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the reward. It really hits the dopamines when I figure out like, oh, I have all these tools and I can actually use them in a way that's fun and feels rewarding.
And to kind of circle back around to the Great Sky Island exploration, one of the things that I kind of did a puzzle wrong in a way. You're supposed to be able to get to a specific area on the Sky Island a certain way, but I just kind of fused a rocket to my shield and just did the shield up. I just took the shield up to the top of the area. And I was like, there we go.
Yeah.
Easy enough. And then I think there was one other part that I like used ascend to get to the very top. And it was like,
Yeah.
there you go. Like problem solved. Like I did that puzzle wrong, but that's fine. The way that it opens up is the way that it opens up the possibilities is really interesting.
Yeah. And that sort of creativity doesn't go away with the Great Sky Island because somehow they managed to take the overworld and kind of translate that to your abilities. And I think, to be honest, a more fun way than Breath of the Wild. Breath of the
Mm.
Wild's abilities were fun. Don't get me wrong. I really, really like launching things, but it did leave a lot of shenanigans to happen, and sometimes it was fun for what it was. Um,
Yeah.
but I think I really like the abilities in this game, specifically with rewind going through the overworld.
Mm-hmm.
It's I'll tell you examples of my exploits with rewind. How are you enjoying the overworld?
So I feel like Breath of the Wild's map is one of those places that I've become so incredibly familiar with to where you can drop me almost anywhere on Breath of the Wild's map and I'll be able to tell you basically where I am. Like not just by the like climate and stuff like that. Like I'll be able to tell you probably exactly where I am on the map because I remember being there. I've
Yeah.
explored like every inch of the place. And Tears of the Kingdom, even though it recycles that map, I find myself confused a lot of the time. It feels like a completely different place, even though I know, like, when you see the overworld of the map, like, by itself, even from, like, the Great Sky Island, you see, oh, okay, yeah, this is the same map, more or less. You see, like, all the basic landmarks are there.
Yeah.
But while I'm there on the bottom, so many little things have changed to where
Yeah.
it's basically unrecognizable when you're on the ground, boots on the ground.
The best little metaphor that I can kind of describe the overworld and the experience between the two is you have a house, right? You know what everything's going on in your house. It has your 5 bedrooms and the 5 bedrooms are located in certain ways. Okay. So now all of your stuff gets reshuffled, new stuff gets added, and even though the layout in terms of the rooms are the same, the items and everything in it are completely different. Everything's shuffled around, and even though it's still technically the same house, the entire feel is different because now the new items are in there in a new way. It changes the style of the house and how you have to go about the house.
It's almost as if a different family moved in. Like you're
Yes, like a different
exploring,
family.
yeah, like you're exploring a house that was like meant to be one way. Like, oh, I put the couch there to face the TV over there, but then you could totally put the TV against this opposite wall and the couch over here instead, and the living room still works as a living room. But it's just
But it's
when
a
I
different
walk
dynamic
in,
now.
yeah, when I walk in, I'm like, that's a different living room. That's
Yeah.
completely different.
Even though the room itself hasn't changed,
Yeah,
it feels as though there's a change.
most of the geography is the same, but it's set dressed completely differently. And I really appreciate that. Like I still feel like I'm exploring a new place. And I can still be like, okay, if I keep going that way, then eventually the heat is gonna get to me because I'm going towards Death Mountain.
Yeah.
So like I know that I can't keep going in that direction. The broad strokes are the same, but I still feel like I'm exploring a new place.
And it also really helps with the addition of caves. I can't stress
Yeah.
this enough. That was definitely something that Breath of the Wild needed,
Hmm.
and it just didn't have enough of it. But with the addition of caves and going actual cave like dungeon crawling, it makes you want to explore old areas just for the new stuff that's going to be there. And when you see a
Yeah.
cave, all of a sudden you're on this 30-minute detour going through this cave, figuring out what's in here. And sometimes you might get lucky and hit a treasure chest that has like a unique, either a unique weapon or like a armor set, which is
Hmm.
what I always go for in this game. I want to get all the armor sets.
Yeah.
So the I think that's so far, at least in my overworld experience, that has been the number one thing that has differentiated itself from Breath of the Wild is the introduction of the cave systems.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like there's a lot more, even though it's the same overworld, there's still a lot more to explore. Like, on top of
Hmm.
adding the sky, and we'll talk about the depths, I'm sure, but
Hmm.
they added more to the overworld, like going through the caves and stuff. Like, that's super interesting. And a lot of them have, yeah, story implications too. And there's a lot of like small little stories in the same way that like Breath of the Wild didn't. Like there were some side quests that had their own kind of stories and stuff like that, but those were few and far between. But I feel like most of the side quests in this game are like that. And the caves, like there's a lot that regard the caves.
Another aspect that I also really like. Again, we're gonna do a lot of comparison because of course we are. They're born from the same cloth. These two games, but there seems to be a lot more settlements and a lot more interactions with the people of the world in Tears of the Kingdom, and I cannot help but appreciate that. I It was something I think Breath of the Wild was sorely lacking, was me interacting with Hylians,
Mm-hmm.
Gerudos, uh, the Zoras and the Ritos. Like, there's a lot more of them in Tears of the Kingdom. So it feels better stumbling upon a settlement or some people camping or merchants.
Yeah.
It's I love those interactions.
Whereas like in Breath of the Wild, you would be the world is kind of a bit more empty, and so randomly stumbling across a merchant, you're like, oh cool, I'm gonna talk to him and buy all the stuff that he has probably because I have a bunch of rupees. Whereas in this game, the entire world feels more alive. There's more to it. And I think that
Yeah,
there's also specifically more interactions between the races. In Breath
yeah,
of the Wild, I felt like, for the most part, aside from like very few examples, all of the Rito stayed in the Rito area. All of the Zora stayed in the Zora area. Like, you basically don't see any Zora outside of the Zora area. There's like one in Lake Hylia. There's like
yeah.
one Goron in the Zora area, but like all of the Hylians are just in Hateno village or in somewhere scattered across the overworld traveling. You know,
Like Kakariko, Hateno, or that one port city, the port town,
Lurelin,
little
yeah.
port town. Yeah, I don't really recall any others. In this one, in Tears of the Kingdom, they seem to open up a lot more pocket settlements.
Mm-hmm. And pocket settlements and just like intermingling between them. Like, I'm heading into the Gerudo Desert right now, and there's other races in the Gerudo Desert. Like, I was just talking to a Rito over there. There was no Rito in the
Yeah,
Gerudo Desert before. Like, there's
I would imagine that the Ritos and the Gorons actually have a very easy time getting there. I wouldn't expect a Zora to be there, but I'm sure they're there.
I haven't seen one yet. I don't know, but
But that makes sense. That makes
yeah, fair
sense.
enough. Like, even like in Breath of the Wild, there's a side quest that a lot of people think is kind of problematic, and I'm maybe inclined to agree. This like love story between a Zora and a Hylian. The entire idea is that you're carrying the messages between them because the Zora is in the Zora area and the Hylian is in the Hylian area. Like, no, in this game they would just meet because the entire world is way more intermingled.
Yeah.
Like, I'm seeing Gerudo basically walking everywhere. I'm seeing Hylians all over the place. I'm seeing Gorons just walking along the land. You know, like that
Yeah.
kind of stuff didn't happen in Breath of the Wild.
No, or if it did, it would be rare or it'd be exclusive to that one guy that had the accordion.
Oh yeah,
I forget
Cass.
I forget the Rito's name, but yeah,
Yeah, there was like one Goron in Zora's domain, and they made a whole point about how weird that was in the game. That he was setting up shop there because he was exploring or something like that. Like, no, like in this game, everyone's just kind of everywhere. There's a lot more cohabitation, I think is the word that I was looking for earlier.
and I think you could make an argument that that's story driven, just from like the desolation and the fact that everyone's just dying in Breath of the Wild.
Sure.
But
And the rebuilding
I
of Hyrule in this game.
yeah, so now that kind of requires the more cooperation rather than just like, hey, we're just trying to survive sort of thing. I may give us a pass to that if given the story implications of it.
Yeah, I understand.
I think traversing the overworld is been more or less just as fun as it has been in the past. I like how if you had the same save file from your previous Zelda game from Breath of the Wild, you carry over those horses. It really does make it feel like a hey, we're moving from here to the next. Like just
Yeah.
it's your Link that's moving on forward. So I got to say hello to Oreo was my first horse, and is a black and white horse, and he's good steed.
I'm so glad that I forgot that I named my very first horse in Breath of the Wild Nay Pona. I saw Nay
Oh,
Pona on there and I was like, yeah.
I I got lazy. The Ganondorf horse that you find in Breath of the Wild, I just straight up named him Ganondorf.
Okay.
I was so lazy.
I forget what I named mine, but yeah, it's cool that you see like all of those OG special horses in this game too.
Yeah,
It makes it feel very special.
it makes it feel like it's your Link and your gaming experience has continued since the last game,
And it has.
and it definitely has horses and everything. The other thing that I really like, traversing the world in Breath of the Wild has always been really fun. and they've intensified it with the fuse ability and specifically like the shields and what you can put on there. The things that you can fuse on the shields can enhance your exploration and traversal. So I found like a mine cart, and you can put that on your shield, and you can just make a skateboard, or
Yeah.
you can make you can put a glider on your shield. And I didn't know this until like I compared the two, but it makes you jump higher with your little second jump where you
Mm.
switch over into your shield mode and you're
Huh.
about to like shield surf. It gives you a higher jump, and that at least in shrines, it opens up the shrines to make it more janked. You can jank it a little bit more. I can't even call it in like the developers didn't intend you to do it like that. I'm like, they kind of did.
I think so, yeah.
This they kind of did.
One thing that I like doing is grabbing one of those bomb barrels if I'm in like an
Mhm.
enemy encampment, or even just a bomb plant if I don't have one, and literally just fusing it to my shield and then doing the shield surf, because it doesn't actually shield surf. It just puts starts the shield surf. You're in the air, putting the shield on the ground, which blows up everything on the ground, but sends you going sky high because you're on
Oh,
top of a
is that
shield. It
what
does,
that does?
yeah,
I got scared. I didn't want to do it.
yeah. No,
I
it's
just thought it
it's
was gonna blow me up.
it's like something out of the Zelda cartoon. Like it's like so silly and ridiculous. Like these like just kind of
um,
wild things that you can do with the fuse ability is just insane.
yeah, that's really funny. I'll have to try that sometime.
One of the things that the overworld has changed is that Hyrule has kind of been starting to be rebuilt, or certain areas of the game built from scratch in some cases. And so it's been really interesting. Like, oh, hey, I know this area. I want to see the way that they've recontextualized it. In the trailers, obviously, we saw that Hateno Village had like a bunch of mushroom theming everywhere. But then also, like, I haven't been to Terrytown yet, but I saw Terrytown from a distance, and kind of seeing the changes that have gone on there, and seeing the development that happened right in the middle of Hyrule. Was it Hyrule Plains, the central Hyrule area? Seeing all of the areas, Karakara Bazaar, that were like
Yeah.
very, basic in Breath of the Wild, but because Hyrule is starting to get kickstarted again, it's kind of starting from scratch in some ways. Seeing the development of these areas for the first time, some new settlements, some additions to previous settlements, that was really interesting to me. There's this vibe, several different efforts all around the map to kind of start developing the world again, doing a little bit of research into this, doing a little bit of research into that, building areas, seeing the construction companies kind of
Yeah.
sprawl throughout the land. That's been super interesting to explore for the first time again, like for the first time ever, actually.
And I love how it really is just a direct sequel, because that's essentially what Zelda and Link sought off, went
Yeah.
out to go do at the end of Breath of the Wild is, let's go rebuild Hyrule. We just got
Hmm.
it back. Basically, Tears of the Kingdom starts off here. We're in the middle of that, and so there's a lot of construction going off. And in the trailers, you see there's little pockets of like wood and housing projects that are going off everywhere. Which turns out, well, guess what? Not only are we rebuilding Hyrule, but we're also going to put a little playground for Link to do his little fuse abilities.
And they really could have just taken the regular Breath of the Wild world and have just built more story on top of that. And it would have been amazing, and it would have been great. We all would have loved it, and it would have sold a lot of copies. But they didn't just do that. They went above and beyond.
It feels like the developers just started building more and more on top. That
Hmm.
like they started with the DLC. We know that it started with the DLC, but
Yeah.
as they started exploring, like, oh well, when we introduce these new abilities, like we can change this world entirely. So why don't we just start there and build more and more and more? And I think that's why. How long did it take? It took quite a number of years to get this game out.
Yeah, it took 6 years
Oh
to
yeah, 6 years. That's
this.
that's a very that's actually quite a long development time, even for Zelda. That's quite long. And when you already
Yeah.
have the blueprint of Breath of the Wild, you know that those 6 years were spent in other areas.
Yeah, like you would think, okay, 6 years, like Breath of the Wild, if you look back far enough and you see kind of what they've been hinting at and stuff, you can see Breath of the Wild's development like as far as 10 years. Basically, I think that some of the devs came out and said that it was basically right after the start of the end of Skyward Sword. They've been working on Zelda U at the time. But then
Yeah.
the game wasn't really taking shape until about, I think it was like 6 or 7 years before the game launched. This was an equal amount of time. But basically an equal amount of time just on a sequel that recycled a whole lot. So I think that
Yeah.
gives you a good idea about how much they actually added into this game. That's how much they've changed.
Mm-hmm.
Is they've added so much to the game. It's almost like they took the same base world and were like, okay, let's build a brand new game on top of this. But like a brand new world, like different maps, different little settlements and everything, but still keep all the old stuff on top of that.
I would it's strictly in addition to,
Mm-hmm.
which I actually quite like. One of the first things that I actually did once I went onto the overworld was go to one of those chasms.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually show that early on that there's a chasm near the little lookout point, which is the first area of the overworld that the game kind of guides you to. And at first, I didn't really know what it was. All I saw was just malice or what they're calling gloom or something in this game.
Yeah.
Just seeping out of the ground. So I ran up to it. I looked inside, and I was out of my curiosity and the fact that this is a video game, so I don't care if I die. I jump right on in, thinking if I die, oh well, I'll just reload. And to my surprise, I was given a very horrific transition into a very hard area. That's the depths of Hyrule. They have a whole little music spell go off when you go in. It's just and I'm like, oh. At first, I thought I was gonna fight some chasm boss, and I just fell into something that I really wasn't ready for. And as it turns out, half of that was true. It wasn't a chasm boss, but I wasn't ready for it. I think I got one-shotted by the first enemy that I saw, and then I decided this isn't for me. I went back up. I'll come back later. I didn't want to start Master Quest quite yet.
Yeah, it's I think they wanted you, because there's a lot of quests in the intro area of the overworld that kind of leads you down into the depths. And that area that you start in is probably one of the easier areas of the depths. So it gets really hard later on too. And I think that they wanted to show you early on in a relatively safer area just how expansive and just how interesting, like fascinating that world is, and how you are absolutely not ready for it, in order to give you the illusion of like, you have stuff to do later. You're saving up experiences for later, because you will have to come back later. Like, you can right now. It ain't gonna be easy right now.
And it really helps that everything's pitch black, so you have more stuff. It's like you have stuff to do later, and we're not showing it to you.
Mm-hmm. And even if you were to explore all that you possibly could in the depths at the beginning, you won't be able to explore all of the depths because of the way that the depths work. It's way more sectioned off. So like the overworld map is kind of like way more open. There's open air and everything, but there's not open world or open air in the depths, because of the way that the depths is a mirrored version of Hyrule in a way. So something that I noticed as I was walking around the map, and actually I noticed that while I'm looking at the map, in the map menu, if I'm looking at the overworld map while I'm in the depths and then I leave the menu, my mini map stays as the overworld. And you can do that, by the way, with any of the maps. Like if you're in the Sky Islands but you want to see what the overworld is, you can switch the mini map to the overworld map, or vice versa.
I didn't realize you could do that.
Yeah, so I had the overworld mini map on while I was exploring the depths, and something that I learned right away is that it is a perfectly mirrored version of Hyrule, except inverted. So all of the mountains are dips and canyons, and all of the dips and canyons in the overworld are mountains and hills and stuff. So it like one for one is the exact opposite of Hyrule.
Yeah, Nintendo really likes doing that with Hyrule and Zelda games, doing this dark light, twilight, not twilight. Like they like doing their inverse Hyrules.
We could probably have some theory crafting episodes regarding like the Dark World or Low Rule or something. But
Oh yeah.
we'll talk about maybe a different episode. But something also that I noticed is that wherever there's water on the map, on the overworld map, there is an impassable wall that goes all the way up to the ceiling. And the Hyrule Plains, the central Hyrule Field area, is basically happens to be surrounded by like 3 separate rivers.
Mm-hmm.
So you can cross those in the overworld, but those are walls in the depths. The northernmost you can go is just north of Hyrule Castle, and the southernmost you can go is like just past Lake Hylia. And then there's obviously 2 separate rivers, and that's just kind of serendipitous to how Breath of the Wild's map kind of worked, to kind of section off the depths in that way. Like it just so happens to work out that way, that Hyrule Field happened to be surrounded by lakes, surrounded by rivers. So, you really do have to explore the entire world. Like as you're exploring the depths, you're forced to go in the overworld and then dig into the caves,
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool.
Again, it's not necessarily linear, but it is taking notes in a way to make the game more controlled. Mm-hmm. And I do enjoy that to a certain degree, where, I can't just waltz right into a really, really tough area. I mean, I guess I could, but I'd have to really go out of my way.
Yeah, I feel more led through the game by the developers, not in the same way. Like, it's still an open world game. It's not like
This is by no means Skyward Sword.
Yeah, like I'm not playing Uncharted or something. Like it's not linear, It's still very much an open world, and I've kept myself busy with several tens of hours of content just literally doing not the story, for example. But the depths is a great way to where they found other ways to feed you through the world more piecemeal.
Yeah. Also give those diehards something to really die for.
Literally. You will die hard.
Yeah.
And you will die for it.
And the rules of the game change down there too. So like when you get hit, I think it's kind of like the Dark Souls 2, I think we talked about, where like you actually lose health permanently.
Yeah.
Except in this, it's semi-permanently. So when you get hit, a heart gets locked away, and you need special items or special meals to get that heart back, unless you go to the surface, just because of how toxic it is down there with the miasma and the gloom and the whatever we want to call it.
Yeah,
it's toxic down there.
Mm-hmm. And we haven't even talked about how it's mainly just darkness.
Oh, well, yeah, a little bit. I talked about it a little bit, where they're hiding. They're kind of hiding the power level down there, where they're not showing you everything.
Yeah.
You do get these plants that you can light up the area, and I haven't experienced them going away. So like I've left an area and came back, and those plants are still illuminated there.
They're basically like really the shrines. Oh, sorry, you're talking about the plants that you shoot around or throw around? Oh,
yeah,
okay.
The plants that you shoot and throw around. So like I don't know when they're supposed to go away, but they haven't really gone away for me.
I don't know. I kind of like that. Yeah.
Because it does feel like you're properly exploring the area.
Mm-hmm.
They do give you resources, but you have to explore it yourself. You can't just view something off in the distance, be like, oh, I want to go there. It's more like hey, why don't you jump into the darkness and see what happens?
Yeah. And despite that darkness, there is a way to unlock the map in a way to where you're able to see things a bit closer to how you're able to on the surface and in the sky. Because there are these kind of like shrine replacements, but without the puzzles and stuff like that, to where you can go to these giant trees, actually that we've seen in the trailers, come to think of it, before.
Yeah.
And kind of brighten up the area around you that also act as teleport points.
Yeah. And very, very welcomed, mind you, because they light up a pretty substantial area.
Yeah.
And it makes me feel a little safer.
And so it not just like lights up the area, but it also unlocks pieces of the map, so that way you're able to explore a little bit more effectively and see kind of like the names of the areas that you're exploring through, just like you can on the overworld. Like you run into like some mine or something in the overworld, and then the little name appears underneath it, and if you check on the map, then it says the name of the area. Very similar to how it's handled in the depths, to where you can run around the depths and find like the Forest of Time or something down there, like the equivalent of like the Forest of Time on the overworld, and like see like all of that area, and then it unlocks the name. It unlocks all the areas, you know?
Yeah.
It feels a little bit more like you're exploring the whole map in that sense. One thing that I've noticed is that exploring the overworld in another way also helps you explore the depths, is that all of the light routes I've noticed are in the exact same locations as shrines are in the overworld.
Oh, I see. I haven't done too much depth, so I haven't put a lot of these
I
together.
I the only way that I noticed that is I was switching between the two maps just because I was looking like where I could explore, you know. And then
Mhm.
as I noticed, I was like, these teleport points are the same. And so I went to the overworld, and like I wherever I had a shrine on my overworld map, I went down a level and then placed a beacon there. And then just did that for all the shrines that I had unlocked. When I went underground, for sure enough, there was a light route there, and was able to like see more of the area.
I wonder if that has story impact. We
I
haven't
haven't.
been
I don't
far
know.
enough to see, but
I
maybe.
haven't either. To be fair.
That's cool. They really did think about it, and
Hmm.
it's kind of weird how well that kind of winds itself together.
Yeah, the exploration of all three areas, and I'm sure we'll talk about the sky in a second, but the exploration of all three of the areas all feed into each other.
So far, my favorite part exploring has been the sky. I'm gonna juxtapose it to Skyward Sword because Skyward Sword, that was my least favorite part, really, because there wasn't anything to do in the sky with like your Loftwing flying around. I mean, yeah, there's like floating rocks, I guess, but there's no real interesting thing about them. In Breath of the
Yeah.
Wild, it's nowhere near as vast, generally speaking. Like they're all like every time you jump up into the sky and you see the sky islands, it's all like an archipelago of some
Hmm.
sort. So it's all scattered around, and it's not as vast as the overworld or the depths, but it's the perfect linear approach to doing like puzzles and exploration, because there
Hmm.
in a lot of cases you can't just glide yourself over to a certain area.
Just
Your
too
odds
far
are
away.
you're not going to have the stamina, or you're going to have to figure out some other way, like glide a certain distance
Or build something.
uh and then build something to like rocket yourself up in order to just get just enough in there
Hmm.
to go to an archipelago you weren't meant to go to. And those experiences have been very clean for me.
Hmm.
And by clean, I mean not, what was the word I was looking for? Not janky.
Yeah.
I was able to properly do the puzzle, like the puzzles, the explorations, the tracking of the shrines, and
Hmm.
all that stuff that I believe the developers had intended, as well as some flexibility to, create your own crafts, to do some more creative things, because it really forces you to create traversal options, because it's not as simple as just running or taking the horse, go to this area. And it's like, no, you got to build something. Build yourself that rocket plane with the
Yeah.
hover thing and whatnot, because you have to be creative if you want to get over there.
Hmm.
And so far I've been liking that a lot. It's activating that left part of my brain to making me creative, or maybe it's the right part. I forget which one, but
One of those.
um, yeah, whichever one makes me more creative. Yeah, it's activating that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of our earlier predictions was that shrines are going to be basically replaced by sky islands in this game, because the way that shrines worked in Breath of the Wild, they're basically small, self-contained areas that you can go through the puzzles the way that the developer intended, instead of a more in the
Yeah.
overworld where you can approach things from any angle. And the sky islands are a similar concept to that, to where like you're literally stuck in the sky and really high up in the sky and probably far away from other islands, to where you really are forced to do things in a specific way. And we were partially right. There are shrines in this game,
Yeah. It
but
doesn't replace them, but as the theme goes with Tears of the Kingdom, it's in addition to.
yeah, and I think that the way that the Sky Islands handled the different types of shrines that Breath of the Wild had, and that Tears of the Kingdom, to be fair, also has, is really fascinating. So there are like basically escort missions with rocks that you're trying to get like one thing, like one rock to from one part of the Sky Islands to from one part of the archipelago to a different part of the archipelago. And those kind of escort missions were, I guess, not really too much in Breath of the Wild, but it's really interesting finding the different puzzly kind of ways that it kind of makes you bring that rock along, that escort mission along, And even like there was the shrines that were like the tests of strength in Breath of the Wild, where you're basically just fighting guys. There's similar things in the Sky Islands that I think are actually way more cool. You're like fighting those like brick guys, and you're fighting like all sorts of different combat encounters in the sky that aren't necessarily like
they are unique. I recall in Breath of the Wild, sometimes you were fighting very samey bosses in the shrines, and sometimes they just like, here's a Hinox, kill it. Anything else?
It would be just like those like little guardian guys, like a major test of strength. You're just fighting a guardian guy, but this one has a hammer instead of a bow. Like
ooh.
This one has lightning arrows, and there are parts of the map that are water. Like, but still, though, I think that the way that the Sky Islands at least handled the tests of strength, not that they're actually called that or anything, but you can just tell that was the idea for a specific island, are a little bit more interesting. The different, I forget what they're called, but those big enemies that you see on the in the Sky Islands, they're pretty different from each other too.
I fought one time and got killed, and I still haven't fought another one yet because I'm like, oh, I don't want to die up here. I want to go explore that other island. I know what that island is. I want to see what that island is.
I think I had like 4 hearts or something when I approached my first one, and I died a lot to it, but I was just too determined. I was like, no, I'm facing this thing. And it was like a level 1 version of those guys. Like the weakest version.
Maybe I just have an overpower complex where I see a boss and I'm like, no, I'm going to come back and I'm going to be decked out with nukes and I'm going to kill you.
But even then, like, I've come back way more powerful, and there's just different kinds. Like, there are small puzzles in and of themselves. Like, the weak spot either moves or is a different place, or the way that it's doing its attacks are slightly different. There's some uniqueness to the challenge. It's not like, oh, I'm fighting this stone talus again. It's like one stone talus is basically the same as all the others. Like, no, those guys are all fairly different from each other. And there's more than just those guys also. Like, I've seen Gleeoks and stuff up there. Like, there's all sorts of different types. Actually, I've only seen one, to be fair. It had like lightning, ice, and fire. It was actually very intimidating. But like,
so there was a part where I was coming. So one of my favorite parts about the Sky Islands are the fact that they're great positioning tools to get you to the overworld. Because I'm lazy and sometimes I don't want to traverse and just climb up mountains. Sometimes I just want to jump from the Sky Island and have a peaceful 2 minutes just gliding to my location.
Yeah.
And sometimes I want to cheese it a little bit more and have a bunch of stamina things, which is like, I'm pretty sure I'm going to do that to get to the Gerudo Valley. I'm going to just jump off of a Sky Island and just glide into Gerudo Town.
If they don't stop you.
They're not going to stop.
Because you're a boy.
They stop. But what if I'm in the air?
Yeah, I guess. Well, yeah. I don't think that you can land in Gerudo Town, though. I don't think that they'll be thrilled about that.
No, but maybe it'll just be a stealth mission where I want to see how much I can get in and get out and do things.
To be fair, I haven't actually gone into Gerudo Town yet, so I don't know how much they've changed things. But from talking to some of the NPCs, I hear that they still have a closed door policy. But in Breath of the Wild, if you get even on the walls, if you're climbing the walls and you pass a certain threshold, it's like checks how far in you are, not if someone has seen you, just how far in you are, and then you're just immediately lose and then go back to like the very front.
I hope they give me the chance to at least do a little mini game of how far in can I get without getting caught. Like, they have to see me.
Stealth, yeah. Be interesting.
That'd be fun.
I think in Breath of the Wild, the one place where you could be male is in the temple, or like the castle, or whatever you want to call it, Reiju's place.
Yeah.
Because you could take off your helmet there, and then they'll see that you're a guy, and then they don't really care.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure about this game.
Link privilege right there.
Link privilege, yeah.
So, generally speaking, the sky's my favorite parts about the game so far. I'm sure that's going to change as time goes on. In an effort not to spoil everything that's up there, I'm not going to talk specifically about what the sky has to offer.
Yeah, I think that it just kind of helps reinforce the exploration angle of the world. because like there are a lot of areas that like I don't necessarily have a shrine, but I can go to where I do have a shrine, like a teleport point in the Sky Islands, and that'll help me get across instead. Like it enforces that exploration in a way.
Yeah.
And to kind of see the area around you. Like there's been tons of shrines that I've seen from the Sky Islands that I didn't necessarily see from the ground. And so it helps me like place those beacons a little bit easier and encourages exploration a little bit more.
Now I'm curious because I haven't gotten close enough to the tip of the depths to test it out, but can you use the I forget what the skill is called. It's the one where you rise up. Can you do that from the depths to get back up to the normal overworld?
So you have to be pretty close to a ceiling in order to use Ascend, but from what I've seen, at least, the ceiling in the depths is really, really high up. There is one area of the game that I don't want to spoil that has some tricky shenanigans with this end. But for the most part, at least, as far as I'm aware, all of the depths are way too... Because you're very underground.
Yeah.
You can't see the ceiling.
No, you can't see the ceiling because you're so far underground. I don't even think you could shoot an arrow to it because it's too high.
Yeah, so there's not a whole lot of opportunities to use Ascend. There's some like Bokoblin encampments and stuff where I think you can use Ascend and some Yiga clan stuff. But for the most part, you're not able to use Ascend too much in the depths.
Okay, I just wanted to know if you experienced that yet.
There could be like one specific mountain or something that's high enough, but I'm not sure. Because even when I've glided into the depths, and I like look at the ceiling as I'm like, next to it, I notice that it's just kind of really, really dark, really low poly and unrendered. I think that the idea is that they don't want you to get high enough to see it.
I'm sure someone's going to cheese it and find out for me.
There might be some tricky ways to do it. I'm unsure though.
Like I can imagine somebody bringing in like a glider, right? Into the depths, somehow getting it all the way in there and then start gliding immediately just to test it.
Yeah, like make
just
a
to
hot
see if
air
it would
balloon
work
or something.
Yeah, just to test to see if they could theoretically just do it.
But I'm sure that those tests have already been done. I just don't know enough about it.
Yeah, I wanted to see if you encountered that.
I've encountered one specific thing that I don't want to spoil.
Okay.
That's not quite the same thing, but it's same, but different. There's an obscure reference for you. One thing that I've seen online that I think really shows off how big this game is. There's a specific website, I think it was IGN, I forget who exactly, but they researched a bunch of different media publications, like video game media publications.
Yeah.
And because everyone has their own like review system, like this many stars, 10 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 or whatever else, they compared every single game that several different media aggregators have done, and even like independent reviewers and stuff, like how like the ratings and stuff worked for every single game that everyone has done. And across all of them, Breath of the Wild was number one. Like across every single, like you see all the usual suspects up there. You see like Skyrim, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, like all of like the best games of all time, like in the top like 10 or so. But then you see number one across like just averaging out every single news aggregator. Breath of the Wild was number one. And that was recent.
Yeah.
And I've heard people refer to Tears of the Kingdom in comparison to Breath of the Wild, that Breath of the Wild feels like a tech demo for Tears of the Kingdom. And that is, pardon the pun, wild. Like how big this game is, how much more there is in this game compared to Breath of the Wild. That was the previous, basically, number one game ever. And they've topped it. And I think by a lot.
I will hold my opinion, at least when it comes to Zelda games, because I have a real sweet soft spot for nostalgia. So Ocarina and Breath of the Wild are both number one for me, but for kind of different reasons.
Majora's Mask is like one of my favorite video games ever. It's definitely my favorite Zelda game for sure.
Yeah, and I can completely see that. I think we can go into a whole thing about that.
Yeah,
but the one thing I want to see, and this is why I'm going to hold my opinion, I want to see how the story of Tears of the Kingdom pans out.
True.
Because that I think that Breath of the Wild is definitely contended, like especially according to that website's metric. If it being number one, I wouldn't complain. Like I'm like, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
At least to me, like I can't say that because
we haven't beaten the game yet.
Well, for Breath of the Wild, I mean.
Oh, okay.
For Breath of the Wild being number 1.
Oh, sure. I think that there's a difference between, like, I don't think that Majora's Mask is the best Zelda game. It's my favorite.
No.
I think that there's a difference there.
No, I know. That's what I'm saying is I can't, at least to me, I can't recognize it as number 1 to me just because it doesn't have the story to back up like the kind of game that I want to be number 1. But that being said, I think if Tears of the Kingdom can manage to do that, and I know that the story is probably out there and some people already know it, so I could be putting my foot in my mouth, but this game could be number 1 if it can deliver me all that Breath of the Wild did and more, and develop a great story on top of that.
Now that we've recovered and had ourselves a little chat, what did you think?
Leave us a comment on YouTube and like the episode.
That really helps us out.
We're also on Twitter and Instagram at the Low HP Podcast if you want to reach out there.
And subscribe if you want to catch more of us on YouTube.
We're also on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Links in the show notes as always.